Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this chat. I really appreciate it. So as discussed before, we usually start out by getting you to talk about yourself. So we'd really appreciate if you could guide us through your educational journey and then your career thus far to getting where you are now.
Okay. All right then. Well, I went to the University of Guelph. I was in the environmental science program there, and I did, pardon me, a bachelor's in earth and atmospheric science. And unfortunately, that degree is no longer around at Guelph. And then I ended up staying at Guelph. I did my master's there in land resource science, focusing on contaminant transfer with relation to tile drains and doing some geophysics and soil chemistry. And while I was finishing my thesis, I actually started working in consulting. So I started in consulting about 23 years ago. And it has been an interesting journey to say the least. I started out doing a lot of field work, which is what I wanted to do anyways. And I was focused on soil and groundwater sampling, drilling, environmental site assessments. I think my boots have probably touched every single corner of this province, exception of the far north. I've been as far north as Pickle Lake and Windsor and Cornwall in the other direction. So I did a lot of field work. I worked at a couple different consulting firms. It's kind of typical for those of us in environmental consulting. When you first start, you start at one place, you get your first job, you get your feet under you, you start, and then you're like, well, is this what I like, or I want to move on to another location? So I worked for a couple different consulting firms, usually about somewhere like 2 to 3 years at each one, until I found O'Connor Associates, which I really enjoyed working there. I was there for about 7 years. And when I worked at O'Connor, I started out mostly with project management, where I'd previously been doing a combination of field work and project management for, like I said, mostly for site assessments and with impacted sites and also doing some physical hydrogeology, dealing with dewatering to support highway construction for a lot of the MTO projects and stuff like that. I did a lot of work doing pumping tests, 24-hour pumping tests, when the temperature would swing from -30 to -15 back down to like -30 throughout the day in the woods.
Sounds exciting.
You know what? It was interesting. I had a coworker with me. We're up in Sundridge and South River, which now that the highway no longer goes through it because now there's the bypass, because we were doing the work many years ago to assess the groundwater quality prior to construction and doing the pumping test to figure out what would need to be done if there's any dewatering to support the construction work. But it was definitely an interesting experience. And I was just always like, why are we always out here doing pumping tests in January? We have to run water and it's freezing cold. But we found you end up finding some very interesting motels to stay at with very interesting people. There's a motel up in South River that was quite interesting. I don't know if it's still there or not, if it's still in operation, but it was they had themed rooms. It was one of the
Oh,
biggest, yeah. So they had one, so like there's a couple that had managed it, and one spouse was, I guess she was an artist. So she painted, like there was like a moose theme, or there was like a bear theme and that kind of stuff. And she also did lampwork beads, and they would provide breakfast in the morning. And this would also be where a lot of students from the local schools would stay before they go into Algonquin to do like dog sledding.
oh,
So it's one of those, it was always those strange places when you're like, as soon as you get outside of the greater Toronto Hamilton area, even like heading towards Windsor or Kingston and Cornwall or up north towards Pickle Lake, you tend to get a very interesting perspective as to how diverse our province is, the province of Ontario is, because it's like you don't even realize how different each corner is. And each area has sort of their own unique, I guess, foods and the motels you end up staying at. Because you usually stay at motels, because usually you're in small towns for a lot of this work too, and you're in between places where you're along the highway. And it's really interesting. It was a good learning experience the first probably about 5 or 6 years of my career of slogging field work and just doing field work and managing field projects and doing some report writing and stuff like that. And then I moved more into the office. I went over to O'Connor, and like I worked on projects that ranged from dealing with midstream like oil and gas pipelines to working on hydroelectric properties. and everything else in between. So I've been pretty lucky as a consultant. Like I've probably worked on as many probably different types of sites and projects that you could think of. I've done everything from standard phase one site assessments and phase twos to doing full on remedial design, working with risk assessors to do risk assessments to manage environmental impacts and mitigation. And all the way through to like I've had the opportunity to go and speak at conferences like at Battelle, and because a lot of the work that I do now has been a lot more chlorinated solvents. So I did a lot of petroleum hydrocarbons in the beginning. I still do petroleum hydrocarbon contaminated sites, but I also been doing a lot more chlorinated solvent sites. And those are very interesting.
I can imagine. I'm sure folks who watch this later may not even know what that means. Do you mind explaining maybe a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so chlorinated solvents, these are solvents that are used in dry cleaning practices and industrial practice. They're degreasers. So anywhere you have a manufacturer that makes everything from nuts and bolts to automotive products, they'll tend to use a degreaser. Historically, we used to use a lot of chlorinated compounds for these things. I know recently in the United States, they're trying to get rid of using what's called tetrachloroethylene or PCE, and they're trying to like ban it. We haven't gone that far here in Canada yet, but these chlorinated compounds, they are we call recalcitrant. They hang around forever. So petroleum hydrocarbons, they don't travel too far. They break down fairly quickly. They're not too bad. But the chlorinated compounds, they sink to the bottom of the groundwater table and above the aquifer. They hit like an impermeable surface, like the bedrock layer or a confining clay layer, and they can travel in whatever direction that the ground is dipping in, and they can go for kilometers.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you
It's
go about remediating that type of situation?
this is where I get to say it all depends. It all depends
Of
on what you're doing.
course.
A lot of it is figuring out where it's gone to, if there's actually risk associated with it. A lot of the work that I do is I work with, like I'm a qualified person for environmental site assessment with the Ministry of Environment, and I work with qualified persons for risk assessment. We actually go through, because we have the generic standards in Ontario that we need to try to get sites to, but sometimes those are not appropriate for the situation. So we'll assess what the actual risk is to whoever's going to be exposed to it. I actually have a site right now that we are coming close to closing out on that had what was called 1,2-dichloroethane. It's a chlorinated ethane, and those were used. It was actually the property was historically a brake manufacturer. So yeah, so chlorinated ethanes, they would have been used as a degreaser. So we have some old degradation products. The client was buying the property. We did the initial site assessment, figured out what was, what's the phase one, what's the history, what's there. And then from the phase one, which is the historical and site walkover, we figure out, okay, where do we have any risks for soil groundwater contamination? We go and investigate that. We did that. We found the 1,2-dichloroethane in the groundwater, in some of the soil. We did delineation. So we figured out how far has it gone horizontally and vertically, got all that sorted out, there was a risk for vapor intrusion from the contamination in the groundwater into the building. It's an industrial building. So we did some vapor sampling as well to assess that risk. And I did all that working with my risk assessor. And we came up with a plan for a source removal. So we figured out where the worst stuff was in the ground. We excavated it, is hauled off site for disposal. And we had powder activated carbon added to the bottom of that excavation. So it's kind of like what was referred to being like in situ remediation, where you remediate by injecting stuff in the ground. But instead of what we did is we had the big sort of large mass that we knew that was where the worst of it was. We removed that from the site, was sent for offsite disposal at a landfill. And then we put the powdered activated carbon at the bottom. And then we've been monitoring the groundwater quality for the last couple of years to see where we were at. And to see if, hey, are we below our risk derived values, or where we need to be? Is everything stable? And we're at the point where we have to make decisions now about how much more monitoring and sampling we're going to do with the client. But it's a site where we, instead of going to generic standards, which could take a very long time to reach, we went with risk derived values instead, given what was on the site, what was close to the site, and figuring it out that way. That's
Wow. Well, that sounds like a very involved type of project. I guess that kind of leads really nicely into the next thing that I was going to ask you, which is what is or are some of your favorite projects that you've had a chance to work on? But this one sounds very fascinating.
that was one of them. That one's almost a simpler project though, to be quite honest with you. A lot of the projects that have been really interesting the past few years have been the ones that have come to us from our legal clients, and they're like, we have stuff. How to get here? Or here's all the work that's been done on our property for the last 10, 15, 30 years, depending. Um, we want to know where it came from and how it got here. And then are we liable or someone else liable? And should we be suing someone else for damages type of thing? So there's been a lot of kind of like the whodunit, but from environmental to work through. And those have been really fun because a lot of times you're dealing with messy data sets.
Mm.
They're not in a way that you're used to normally working with them. So you have to be malleable in your mind. It's okay. This is not how I would have done it, but is it wrong? No. Is it perfect? No. Is it good enough? Yes. Or do we need to or can we actually make a justification for going to get more data? Or is it even possible to get more data or recent data? Because it's not always possible either. I just
Yeah,
finished.
I think that's kind of the slogan of environmental careers is it all depends. There's not a prescriptive response to any project, even if you've done one similar, because every area is so different.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to areas like you're talking about, especially like brownfields and things like that, and then property, title, ownership, and who is actually responsible. Is it the initial
Yep.
person or is it the most recent person that has it? And I think that that's really a good highlight to talk about is that a lot of environmental work is investigative in nature, and then
Mhm.
you find your results and then you present them and you go, okay, can we fix it? I would love it if we could fix it. Here's how we could fix it if you want to
Yep.
fix it.
A lot of
So
it is
that's
definitely
really
like that, yeah. Because what I find is actually there you have actually two sort of sides. So you actually have the human side, then you have the technical, like groundwater, dirt, air side type of thing. And a lot of times, and you think, well, for example, if I use a gas station example, like I thought I was gonna get bored of them, but then I started realizing it's a gas station, yes. It's similar contaminants, but how it got there or what else is in the ground or what are the objectives and drivers for this project for this client? And is the technical standards and safety authority involved? Is the Ministry of Environment involved? It's all those other aspects. There's the raw numbers and data and borehole logs and that kind of thing that you can look up. And there's also the other side, that's the human side and the human social political side of things as to how who wants what and when and how and juggling. I'd say it's probably a lot more challenging juggling the human side than it is to juggle the contaminated site side.
Oh, absolutely, because the technical side is A and B. Like it's either there or it's not, and you can measure exactly how much is there if it is there. Whereas with humans, it depends on what their goals are and what resources they have and what they think is valuable
Yeah.
versus what we think is valuable. And I think that that's another great point that you've brought up is a lot of consulting specifically in any genre, I would think, but especially in the environmental field, is it's a lot of bridging knowledge gaps, but also bridging expectation gaps. Like, okay, here's the information that you wanted from us, but realistically, you can't do what you want to do. Here's a plan for how you can get close to
Yeah.
doing what you want to do. Please accept that. And if not, then we'll come up with plan B and C and D and figure it out until we get there. So I think that that's a really good point that you brought up. Do you find that because your line of work now, like the types of projects that you're doing now, are so messy like that in nature that you find the ministry is involved in the majority of your projects?
um no, actually it takes so with the way the regulatory environment is in Ontario, it takes a lot for the ministry to get involved. Like I have a couple where there's orders been put on by the ministry or there's a notice of violation and we're working directly with the ministry. But it's not that often. I find so the ministry tries to work with folks who are having issues if they're aware of it, because usually someone has to make a complaint for a
Mm,
situation to be made
okay.
aware of. But the other side dealing with the ministry is the record of site condition side. So that's what we refer to as being like the brownfields regulation, where if you have a commercial site or an industrial site, you want to turn into a more sensitive land use, say like for a community center, a hospital, residential, especially like right now in Ontario, we're driving, we want to do, build more homes faster. It's been the whole situation. We work with records of site condition, and that's where we do involve the ministry. And involving the ministry is can be a real benefit early on in those projects. And they're
Getting
definitely,
ahead of the issues.
pardon?
I said because you're getting ahead of the issues. Like if you involve them early, then you can figure out
Yeah.
what they did earlier rather than having to fix it after the fact.
Yes, because going back to get more data after you've already drilled the site and gotten soil and groundwater samples is not a great thing to have to do. Especially if if it's a straightforward site, that's simple, that's fine. But if you know you're going to go down the route of risk assessment, like for example, I have a site, the project's on hold just because of other things, but it was a gas station and they're looking to convert it over to residential with underground parking, main floor commercial and above grade, like second floor up, all residential. And there's contamination on the property, and the contamination actually goes quite deep. It's kind of a little bit unusual for a gas station, but it just has to do with the way the groundwater flows in this area. It's got a strong downward grade, so the groundwater pulls downward, the contamination gets pulled downward. And it's one of those sites where it's like time is money. Or like, as we had to go to the client saying, look, I need to talk to the ministry in advance. But this is what we're thinking. Like you can do here's what it looks like if you dig up the entire site. This is how long it's going to take you to get a record of site condition. But I called the ministry. I've talked to them about the general aspect of the site. Like we have some products, we have some gasoline that's floating around that's old stuff in the groundwater we'll have to address. And I've talked to my risk assessor about, and we can get you your record of site condition filing quicker if we do a risk assessment and leave some of the contamination in the ground, or technically leave in the ground, because we know eventually it'll be dug out because you're putting 2 or 3 stories of underground parking. But in order to get that that record of site condition filing faster, it would be better for us to be more conservative and assume that we're going to leave contamination in the ground, even though it'll end up being better in the long run, because that's like a 3-year process versus trying to do everything else with like 5 or 6-year process to get to the end. But that's where like making the call to the ministry's district engineer to get a hand, and like this is what we're looking at. And we're also dealing with, say for example, City of Toronto requires record site condition filing reports for some of their work as well, if we're going to convey land to them in order to develop a property. So it's definitely involving like the regulators, be it the municipality or the Ministry of Environment, early on in a project when you're going to be having to work with them, and it's going to be one of those ones that's like it's a little bit tricky, not quite straightforward. You get their buy-in off the bat, because at the end of the day, it saves you a lot of heartache and headache. And the client may not quite get it, but you have to kind of explain it's like, I need to involve the ministry now because of X, Y, and Z. But especially for that site, I described the process as being a choose your own adventure novel. Here's what you have. If you go this way, it's going to take this long and cost this much. If you go this way, it's going to take this long and cost this much. It's like, what do you want to do? How much time, how much money?
Yeah. I find a lot of consulting is like that. We usually present a few different options and we go, okay, well, here's the one if you do nothing. There's always the do nothing option.
Yeah.
There's you do nothing, here's what's up option, which is always the like, surprisingly, nobody takes that. And then there's always at least like 2 other options where you're like, okay, well, here's the Goldilocks option, which is in the middle. It's not too expensive, and it's not too involved, but it's also involved enough and expensive enough that it'll get what you need done. And then there's the, well, if you have the money and the time, here's what we could do option.
Or if you have more time, if you have a lot of time and you don't have enough, and you want to be able to spread the pain, like the fees across, you can actually reduce costs, but it'll take more time.
And that's where it comes down to priority, right? Like for the client, like is their priority to be done by next year and get this out of the way, or is their priority longevity and
sit and wait?
Sit and wait. And I think that depends. I found anyways, when I was involved with municipality projects or things like that, it was usually like, now we would love this now. It's flooding now. So what can we do immediately within this budget year to be able to get this done because we have money for it now.
Yeah.
Whereas down when we had development projects, for instance, those ones were a lot more willing to let it spread over a few years because it's going to take
Mhm.
them a few years to build the things anyways that they need
Yep.
to and get the permits that they still don't have and things like that. So those projects were a lot more like, yeah, we see that. That's fine if it takes 5 years because we won't be done until then anyways. So I think that that's a really interesting factor when talking about environmental careers is no two projects are the same, even if they're involved at the same river, but in
Yeah.
a different area. You would think it'd be the same, but it's not. So yeah, I think that's a great thing to highlight then. It sounds very interesting, the types of projects that you're able to work on. What
Yeah,
is
I
your
even get to do
title then at
transit.
this time?
Sorry, pardon? What am I doing
Oh,
this time?
sorry. What is your title then at this time since you kind of
Senior
encompass so much?
scientist, like, well, it's we're kind of at BlueFrog, we don't get hung up on titles too much. I
Hmm.
mean, I have like a role where I have team that I'm an administrative manager for. So I've got about five, if I remember correctly now. I just stop and think about it for a second. It's two. No, I have six. I got six that I'm an administrative manager for. So I help them with the administrative side of things. But when it comes to like managing active projects, I've got a variety of different projects. I've got transit projects. So I'm actually on, we just got on to one of the major transit projects for the GO tracks for the east and west for the upgrades there. And I've been managing on another infrastructure project for a light rail transit one as well. And that one was mostly from a geotechnical perspective. I'm not a geotechnical engineer, but I work with one and I support him, and we do a lot of hand and glove work together. And I was doing the physical hydrogeology, figuring out what's the groundwater flow direction, how can we just groundwater flow, how can we construct X, Y, and Z the most effective way and manage the groundwater. And there's also environmental stuff that got thrown in there, like I'd help them with their excess soils pieces. I'm their qualified person on the phone. They have folks that are in house, and if if they're not certain about something, they call me and I help them through understanding the reg, or I get to make my nondescript email request to different folks in the ministry to get things sorted out. And that's actually been quite interesting to work on a transit project. There's been, like I said, there's been some environmental, but even just the understanding the amount of work that goes into before you have to put shovels in the ground to build something. I don't think a lot of people have a good appreciation of how much effort goes into that.
That I would argue is the longer portion of a project. In my experience, anyways, like there have been projects where I've stepped in, it's already been 2 years of back and forth discussions, trying to get permits, trying to get the right personnel and the right teams and the sub teams and the
Mhm.
subcontractors and all of that kind of stuff that even after I had left still wasn't shovels and boots in the ground yet. And then there were other projects where it flew by because they were emergency works. It all
Yeah.
varied, but I would say that upfront is the thing that takes the longest, especially if it's an RFP, because they have to have it out for a certain amount of time. Then they have to vet everybody, and then you have to go back and forth about things, and then you get into discussions about okay, what do you actually want, and how much can you like pay for that, and then designing it and getting all
Yeah.
your baseline information before you even consider putting together a design. It takes so much longer than people, I think, realize. A lot of these projects take 5 years, 5, 10 years at least.
For the lead
If
up
they're,
sometimes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, just to
It's not easy.
no. And then there's monitoring after that. A lot of projects now have
Yeah.
mandatory monitoring after that for 5, 10 years after that before you can even say, yeah, it was a success or it wasn't. So a lot of these projects, I put together case studies through Bluebird every month of
Yeah.
restoration projects from around the world that are completed
Yeah.
now, and they're all from the early 2000s or earlier, usually, just
Yeah.
because it's taken years and years to see whether those plants would take or those species would come back or whether the river was really going to blow out that corner like we hoped that it wouldn't or things like that. So it's definitely a long-term gamble, even if it seems like a short-term problem.
Yeah. So that's probably one of the benefits of being in environmental consulting is that, especially in work like a company like at BlueFrog, where we have geotech and environmental and hydrogeology, we do all that together. Plus, we do the legal work. I actually just got approved as an expert witness for the Ontario Supreme Court. So that was kind of fun.
Congratulations. That's
I know that's a
incredible.
congratulations yet.
Still,
It was
it's
interesting.
it's an honor regardless to be
It
chosen
was
for
actually
second.
fun. People are like, are you crazy? I'm like, but it was one of those things where it's like, I was asked questions to figure out what happened and then present the information in front of the judge with, with lawyers and stuff. And it was, it was actually still easier than my master's thesis defense.
I think
So
everything is easier than that at that point. Once you've gone through the thesis defense, you're like, oh, I can take on anything.
I didn't realize that was going to be the case, but it was one of those things because, like I said, I've been fortunate where I've done legal work, legal litigation support work, supporting clients and dealing with orders or notice of violation from the Ministry of Environment, and working through and working with the ministry to solve these issues. And then I've gotten to work on like transit projects, and then I still have like standard, what I call like the standard phase 1, phase 2, like environmental site assessments, remediations. And I get some fun remediations where I still have one site that we're trying to figure out why is something not working properly. And we're on our second pilot. It may go to a third. We'll see, for a different approach,
Wow.
because we're trying to sort out what's going on and why. But it's one of those things where like I'm working with my remediation contractor and the client and our stuff internally, and speaking with my colleagues, like saying this is what we're running up against. And they've even reached out to their supplier and their colleagues in the States as well, because there's one other site that this supplier of this product is working on that is similar to ours. It's in the States with a sort of a similar situation happening, and we have to get, like say, get groundwater moving to get the remediation program to be moving forward as opposed to being stagnated. So, but it's really, like I said, it's really interesting when you get a chance to do so many different projects. Like my week could be, it'll change. You may think you have your week planned out and then something happens. You have a plot twist.
It's always a plot twist, especially if you leave on a Friday and come back on a Monday. Everything you thought you had together on Friday is no longer anymore on Monday. Everything is totally different and changes all
Yeah.
the time. I know that's not for everybody, but that was something that I really enjoyed about consulting, is because you're never
Mhm.
bored. There's something different all the time, and there's always something you don't know. You're constantly learning new things
Yeah.
all the time. Even if you've done 1,000 transportation projects before,
Oh,
this
there's
one
always
might
something
be
new.
totally different.
You're just like, I even like to this day, I'm like, that's new.
Yeah.
20 plus years in and complicated ties, I'm just like, well, I get was like, okay, that's different. Okay, give me a minute. Let me sort through
Yeah.
this.
Let me think about it. Yeah. I think so much onus is put on education, which is definitely important as a baseline, but I think the majority of this type of thing you learn by doing it,
Yeah.
and just being out there and seeing it flooding and being like, oh, that's what that means. When I look at that data on a computer, that's what that looks
Yeah.
like. Got it.
Yeah, you have no real appreciation for what you're doing. Like I was fortunate where I did like drilling and geophysical surveys in my master's, and also for field camp and stuff like that. But a lot of folks, when they go to school, they don't necessarily get that hands-on. So you show them a soil core, they're like, what is this? I'm like, okay. Because in consulting, you get people who like, I have a geoscience background. So it's easy for me, like dirt's like, well, dirt, but you're used to be able to look at things. But getting folks who say like a biological background, ecology, sustainability, whatever else, they come in to do this kind of work because they've like a job in, and you start training them, and you have to explain them like how to think about, like, how did it get here? Like, don't look at what's there, but how did it get here? You have to start understanding the natural processes that are around you.
Yeah. Everything's interconnected. And I
Yeah.
think that that's the biggest explanation I could give for consulting, for environmental consulting, is it's never one person. It's usually at
Mhm.
least 10 with different specialties. Like you always have like an ecologist, sometimes you'll have a fluvial geomorphologist depending on what the project
Yep.
is. You'll always have an engineer. Maybe you'll have a modeler that's different than your engineer, unless your engineer is
Yep.
awesome, you can do both. You'll have somebody who's on the administrative side putting together proposals and financial sides of things. You'll have your project manager who kind of has their fingers in a bunch of different
Mhm.
things. There's always a million and one people that are working on a project at any given point, and specializing is great, but nobody's ever a full specialist in anything. They always have at least
Yep.
tertiary knowledge of all the other things that they work on at the same time. Like when I was a fluvial geomorphologist type of
Mhm.
person, that was all the time was me talking with ecologists, talking with
Yep.
engineers, talking with our climate models and seeing what that situation was like. Talking with legal because it was a project we were working on was
Yep.
on a native land. And so
Mm-hmm.
we had to deal with all of that type of thing. And anything we wanted to do, they had to have their own council meeting.
Yep.
Every little thing they had to have a council meeting about it.
Yep.
And so we usually waited and then gave them a bunch at the same time and to save them time, but then they had to get back to us. And it's very eye-opening and I think really fun to be
And you
able to.
really learn how to focus on your communication skills. Like I say,
Yes.
we've actually worked with fluvial geomorphologists on projects too, because we've had creeks that we've had to deal with cleaning up, and like, call it geomorphics. We need help.
Why
We
is
can't
this
do
doing
this.
this, please?
Yeah, because most of us, like, I'm a professional geoscientist, and we have some professional engineers as well. We have more, I think we have more professional geoscientists than engineers at our company right now. But it's definitely, you have to learn how to communicate in different realms, because how you communicate, like for example, how you communicate at a town council meeting is going to be different than how you communicate with lawyers and clients on a legal file, and then how you communicate information in a trial. Like I had to learn how to communicate what I'm seeing on a photo that's being presented to me, so that someone reading the correspondence from the trial knew exactly where I was referring to in that said photo.
Yeah.
And that's not something I've ever had to do before. So I had to learn on my feet in front of the judge. So I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? And then keep reminding myself. But it's like I said, 20 plus years in, there's still things you are learning. And people forget that, well, maybe they don't forget, but the science and understanding contaminants and new contaminants are emerging like PFAS, it just keeps progressing.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to do like to be a professional licensee, you need to do 30 hours of continuing professional development. I still do more than that a year.
Yeah.
Or I read journal articles I get my hands on that are interesting, like actually from my alma mater, University of Guelph. A recent one came out about glacial geology and changing the terminology that I learned as a student is now morphing into something else because of our increasing understanding. So you can't rely upon what you did in school. You can to a certain extent, and it's a good basis, and it
Yeah.
helps you to think or to learn how to think. That's one of the biggest things is learning how to think and learning how to question,
Yeah.
because you can't just you absorb it. You have to be able to think the process through. I think something's called like fluid reasoning.
Yeah, critical thinking is very important in this field because everything is so different all the time. And there's always things that you maybe haven't considered, which is why having multiple people on a team with
Yeah.
different perspectives is so good and different ages. I feel like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people don't realize how to spread out. A lot of environmental consulting companies are now. It's not just senior people anymore. It's senior people all the way down to people who just graduated. And I think that that's such a good dynamic to have because then you have a different
Yeah.
perspective on things that maybe if you've been staring at this for 30 years, you have one way of looking at it and then somebody new comes in and goes, "Oh, but what about that?" And you're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think that that could have been something
It's really
worth."
encouraging the juniors though to speak up. I mean, I've always been in firms where it's been like you had the fresh grads all the way to the people who've been around forever, but it's getting the younger, like the more junior staff to actually speak up about it.
Mhm.
And it's like, what do you think? You're like, what?
Advocate
Gotta
for
add
what
it
you
in.
see. Yeah, advocate for what you see. And if you're advocating for it and it's wrong, like whatever you think is happening, then
Yeah.
that's a learning opportunity for you. And that's all like when you're hired at a consulting firm, you're not hired because you're perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially when you're younger. You're hired
Well, no one's
because
perfect.
no, I mean like,
Yeah.
like you're not seasoned or anything yet when you're younger and the reason that you're hired is because there's that potential for you to
Mm-hmm.
grow and learn and offer a different perspective and like
Yep.
that's what you're there for and it only makes the team stronger to ask those questions.
It
But
it really actually it does help a lot, because it also helps with, like, I've been trialing some software right now, and I've been getting different people to provide their feedback, and I've had slightly different feedback from each person,
mm,
because I'm also asking questions, but also I'm not going to necessarily ask all the questions that need to be asked when trialing this out. I'm
yeah,
asking for input from others, because that's one of those things is like you need to, like, it's consulting, environmental, whatever, even like geological, geotechnical engineering, whatever else. it's all about getting those different perspectives. It
Yeah.
actually really blends in. It creates a better team at the end of the day. And the better output, because that's what we get paid for, is our output.
Well, and that too, like there was a advice that I got when I was doing my undergrad. I was in my fourth year of undergrad and I took a course. And of course, your classes at that point are like 10 people. Because
Yeah.
in first year it's like 400, 500 people for 3-hour lectures. By the time you get into fourth year, it's really niche
Hmm.
classes with less people. And that was the advice that I was given in that class, which is communicate to everybody as though they know nothing about what you're talking about. Like
Hmm.
explain it in a way that, a high schooler would understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because you don't know where everybody's level is at with things. And I've learned that a lot running Bluebird
Yep.
is that everybody's all over the place with their knowledge. I get messages from people who are actively in our field, like
Hmm.
like like you and the people that I interview. And then there are
Hmm.
people who are fresh out of high school. They're like, I don't know what I want to do. But this was a great profile, like to watch and see that
Yeah.
that could be like a career I could have or things like that. And just all over the place, nature clubs and things like that. And there's a lot more people interested in this type of thing than you can realize, and people will read it
Yeah.
even if you don't know that they're reading it or watching it or listening to it. They're reading, watching, and listening to it. So anything to make anything more accessible is always better. I think there's a few municipalities now. I know the TRCA is very adamant about it, that when you submit reports, they have to be at a certain level if they're going to post them on their
Hmm.
website like a public document.
Yeah.
They call it grade 13. I think
Oh,
it
really?
yeah,
Usually
they
it's
use that
grade 8 and
terminology
4.
with us. They were like grade
Well,
13
I was
level.
well, I was OAC grade 13, so
Yeah.
but usually it was actually a grade 8 level because I've had to write technical reports to the Ministry of Environment, and then
Mm,
we've had to repackage that information with a cover letter and then a layman style report for a private property owner with the technical backing added to it in
yeah.
case they take it to someone else to review, like another consultant.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I was always told grade 8. I haven't heard the grade 13 like OEC, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I was like, oh, we haven't had that for a little while, but I know exactly what you mean. Like that bridge gap between like high schoolers and like everyday people in the workplace. Like I
Yeah.
knew what it meant, but it was funny terminology to hear. But on the note of that repackaging, I've noticed a lot more in recent years with research papers, they include a plain
Yep.
language summary,
Yep.
which is so nice and such an easy way for people to like dip their foot in that document,
Hmm.
because then they're like, oh, I know what that word means. And then when they read
Yeah.
the document, then it's tied together and they're like, oh, that's the technical term for that, got it, and can follow along a lot easier. And I think that that's pretty great.
And that really also helps too when you're doing advocacy work. So the company I work for, we're part of the Ontario Environmental Industry Association,
Okay.
and I'm on a couple of the subcommittees. And in order for us to get in front of a member of provincial parliament or any of the ministers, they're not technical folks. They have all the people who support them that are technical, but we've had to work with the folks at ONEA, or the Ontario Environmental Industry Association, to repackage what we want to say in a way that is very short, like 3 sentences, that gets a minister's or an MPP's attention
Mm.
and gets them listening and interested, and then they will dive in deeper, or they'll help put us where we need to be to deal with whatever the situation is.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard of that recently, so I'll definitely do some more research into that. But
Yeah,
it's a good
they're really
it's a good
great. They're really great advocacy group for the environmental industry as a whole.
That's great. That's great. I think that's another like good skill. Like when we talk about communication, obviously verbal communication is really good
Mhm.
and cross-disciplinary communication is definitely needed. But at the end of the day, you're presenting it to your community
Yep.
and you're trying to rally your community to support this project that's for them,
Hmm.
right? For the majority of cases. And the majority of the community isn't in this field, otherwise they'd be working with you in your office.
Yeah.
So it's always about perspective. Like if you like when we do landowner meetings, for
Yeah.
instance, there's going to be something in a community. We hold a landowner meeting. We say, come, like we're going to talk about the
Hmm.
project, and you have the big posters up with
Yeah.
all the thing, and then they can write on it. There's so many times where I've gotten feedback where I'm like, oh, I don't know that because I don't live there, but your backyard backs onto that property and you've lived there
Mhm.
for 20 years. And of course you've noticed that,
Yeah.
right? So it's very valuable both ways for
Yeah.
us to give information to them, but to also get their feedback. They're the ones who live there. They're the ones who are impacted by this type of thing. And what do they want to see out
Yeah.
of their community? Um, which I guess like kind of leads into the last thing that I was interested in asking you, which is
Mhm.
what advice would you give for an early career professional or somebody that's in post-secondary thinking of pursuing an environmental career?
There's so many options available today to people who are leaving high school to go to college or university. And don't feel like you're stuck with the first option that you start with. And also, a career path or your path and what you do for life is not a straight line. Don't expect it to be. Don't expect it to be easy. Find something that you really enjoy doing so that when you have those hard days, you can still remember, this is why I like doing this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
reach out as much as you can. We actually had a summer student who just graduated from high school this past year, and he was off to Fleming. He was able to do some of the construction classes that were offered at high school now, which I think is absolutely fantastic. But he was thinking that the only way he could work outdoors, because he worked at Bronte Provincial Park and some other place. He thought the only way he could work outdoors is if he worked in construction. And then he was talking, he's actually my boss's neighbor. He's talking to him. It's like, oh, this sounds interesting. So he actually came and worked with us for the summer. And I had no idea that this was a path available to me.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, you pick something, like you don't have to go to school right away after high school either. I know a lot of families like to push their kids to go and do something, but take a minute, think about what you want to do. What do you like to do?
Mm.
What will
Yeah.
you be what will you be happy at the end of the day when you go home that you accomplished? What do you want to accomplish in life? So it's probably like a deep think of like, what do you want? And if you change your mind, that's okay. And people get really upset. It's like, when I started this and I can't, it's like, you know what? Does it matter? At
Yeah.
the end of the day, it doesn't matter. When you're 75 years old, will it matter?
Yeah, I think that's been the best highlight of all these chats that I do. That's why I start out by saying, "Oh, tell us how you got here." Because everybody's path is all over the place. And a lot of people didn't even think of the environmental field as a career. And then they took like one geography class in like second year of university and
Yeah.
they're like, whoa, I love dirt. How do I work with dirt every day or rivers or whatever else they've ended up getting into? And then it just sparked that flame and they followed that interest all the
Yeah.
way into their career path to either create their own company like Ian Smith or work for the MNR or MNRF. I think it's just
I
MNR.
forget now. It changes.
I think they're just MNR now. Yeah, like Deanna Lindblad
Yeah.
or people like that. Like, yeah, I think following your passion is really important. There's always going to be a career path for every passion that you have. Like, don't
Yeah.
feel scared thinking, oh, well, that's not a job. Absolutely, it is. Make it a job.
But you
Somebody
got to
somewhere is
talk to
doing
people
that as a
though.
job.
Yeah, you really have to go out and talk to people. Like I didn't realize about the environmental science programs per se when I was getting into my last year of high school because it wasn't until I actually entered the regional science fair and I went on to the national science fair and we had a college professor who taught the environmental tech program at Confederation College. I grew up in Thunder Bay.
Mm.
And just when I was talking about it, because I was thinking, well, I have to like do like geology and chemistry or something because I really like this and I like this because I almost went into pharmacy because I liked chemistry. I almost went into pharmacy, but I still preferred being out in the, like I've always was always an outdoors kid that always did camping, hiking, climbing, that kind of stuff. So I was talking with this professor from the college and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And it wasn't until, and then being able to go to school like at Guelph, they had a couple like the environmental science and they had different streams at that time you can get into. They still do, there's fewer now, but just knowing what the options were available, and I do feel like the Professional Geoscientists of Ontario, Professional Engineers of Ontario, they are getting out. There's more communication happening
Mm.
with young people these days. Like I took my oldest daughter to Go Eng Girl at UG a couple weekends ago.
Yeah.
She wants to become a lawyer, but she wanted to do the engineering. She also wants to do the Go Phys Girl. I'm like, okay, well, You're only 13. You got lots of time, so whatever.
Yeah.
It's just getting enough exposure. Honestly, it's getting enough exposure and realizing that it's not a straight path.
Yeah. Yeah. I think accessibility of information is really important. I'm really a proponent for that. Like that. I mean, that's kind of the whole mission of Bluebird in the first place,
Yeah.
is to just bring everything from all different environmental fields all together and be like, here's all of it. If this
Yeah.
is something you can do if you want to do it, but here's something else, and here, because I find that a lot of the organizations that provide information, which are incredible, all of
Mhm.
them are incredible, but they're niche. It's
Yep.
either like we're very amphibian focused, or we're very into birds. Birders are
Yep.
very intense. But it's just birds, right? Like that's their
Yep.
focus, and they're the most knowledgeable people about birds. I am definitely not as knowledgeable or even close as they are, but I can facilitate their knowledge to other people.
Yeah.
And even that's a career. So anything, yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice, is just follow the thing that you're interested in, because everything's going to take a lot of work. Everything is
Better
going to take
like
a lot
it.
of work. Whatever
Yeah.
job you have will take a lot of work. What are you going to be happy with that you spent your effort on in that day when you go home?
Yeah. Because when you
It,
think about it, as an adult, you spend more of your time working than anything else. This
yep.
probably sounds depressing, but it's true.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I took 2 years off from consulting and I worked as an in-house environmental specialist at a real estate investment trust.
Oh,
And that
wow.
was, and
Okay.
that's me going on the other side of the table, as I like to say. It was a
Yeah.
completely different perspective, but I also had to be in the boardroom with like the CFO and the COO of the company.
Yeah.
And that's learning. So I took a break from consulting and went back into it because I'm insane, it feels like. But it's one of those things where I had to learn another way of communicating and a different skill set, but I was also able to understand better understand drivers of the business side of the client.
Yeah.
So even though I took 2 years off and I was reviewing reports written by other consultants, but I was also working to help make decisions within the company with regard to, are you going to buy this property or not? What's the risks associated? We're at risk. What's the risk tolerance, and understanding how that varies. And then I've taken that now and how I manage my clients that are in a similar industry. I use that knowledge is like in the back of your head. Like you don't lose anything you learn.
No, every skill is transferable to every job, just in a different way.
Yep.
Like there were things that I worked at Scotiabank for a while, totally unrelated to
Mhm.
environmental science at all. But like you said, it was a completely different way of communicating with people and seeing their perspectives on projects that involved land ownership and stuff. I was like, oh, this is your criteria
Mhm.
for when you do this. That's good to know. So that when I then went into consulting, I'm like, I completely understand where you're coming from when you say
Yep.
that. Got it. So yeah, I think that that's a really good piece of advice. Is there anything else at this time that you are interested in sharing or talking about before I let you go?
Um, Not really. Just if anybody's interested in whatever environmental industry, find a mentor. Find, well, that doesn't be like a formal mentor, but find someone who's doing it and talk to them. Find
Yeah,
out what they like and don't like. Um, You'd be surprised because the mentor-mentee relationship it's a two-way street. So I'd say take advantage of whatever is available to you and ask questions and go digging, because even you just look at what's available at the different schools across even just our own province, it's amazing as to what is out there. Like I say,
yeah.
it's just you'd be surprised. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who wouldn't find something interesting in the environmental industry, I think.
I think so too, because there's always something for everybody, even if like you just want to do the legal side of things or policy side of things and you don't want to go out and get your hands
Yeah.
dirty. That's still environmental in
Yep.
nature. So yeah, I put together an education guide a few years ago that has all of the environmental programs for the universities and colleges in Ontario, and so now I'm making the actual document version of it so that I can give it to schools instead of it just
Yeah.
being online. And it's incredible. Like I'm like, okay, and another page, and another page, and another page, and it's just highlighting like their unique programs at their
Yep.
at each school, especially like places like Niagara that have ecosystem restoration, which is a graduate certificate, which not a lot of
Yep.
people have, or add-ons like Fleming and Trent have that co-program where in 4 years you get two different degrees. So
Yeah.
uh, yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for chatting. It was wonderful to speak with you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Same, take care. Good luck. And
Awesome.
I hope,
Thank you.
actually, I
Take
can't wait
care.
to see what your education package looks like.
Oh, I can
I'll have to
definitely
learn
send
it.
it to you when it's finally ready. It should be done this week sometime.
Excellent, because I would love, actually, honestly, I would love to share it with like my kids, like grade 7, grade 8 teachers, because they're at that stage. Like grade 7, grade 8
Yeah.
is when the brains are going and listening to what they're going to be going to like a sewage treatment plant for the field trip for grade 8.
Oh, that's so cool.
I know. I didn't get to go to one until I was in university.
I remember going to a dam in high school, the one in Guelph, the big dam in Guelph. They took it because I went to Paris High School.
Yeah.
They took us to that dam and we got to go inside it and see how it all worked and everything. I was like, this is a job? Like
It's
somebody does this?
amazing.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, you
Awesome.
take care, Shelby.
Thank you. You as well. Take care. Have a great
Okay.
day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.